Endless silence. A desert that stretches like an ocean of stone, windswept, barren, and unforgiving. Beneath a burning sun, the land appears lifeless, its sands shimmering with heat, its horizon an eternal mirage. Yet, hidden upon this vast canvas lies a secret so immense it can only be seen from the heavens. Lines carved into the earth, not random, but deliberate, geometric precision, colossal animals, celestial patterns. A hummingbird spreads its wings across the desert floor. A monkey curls its tail in perfect spiral. A spider, stretched in fragile symmetry, waits for eternity. These are the Nazca Lines, etched more than 1,000 years ago, so vast they defy human eyes at ground level, so enduring they have survived centuries of wind and time. Who made them? Why here, in one of the driest places on Earth? Were they offerings to the gods? Maps of the stars? Or messages carved for something beyond our world? As the desert breathes beneath the gaze of the sun, we begin our journey into a mystery carved not in stone, but in sand, a story whispered by a civilization long gone, and a question that still unsettles the modern mind. The Peruvian desert awakens each morning with the rising sun, its dunes painted gold, its silence broken only by the rustle of wind over stone. Here, in the Pampas de Jumana near the town of Nazca, lies one of humanity's greatest enigmas. It is a land that has kept its secret hidden for centuries, until modern eyes learned to see it from the skies. But long before planes soared overhead, this desert was alive with people. Around 200 BCE, the Nazca civilization emerged, inheriting traditions from their Paracas predecessors. Farmers and artisans, they were masters of survival in a place that seemed uninhabitable. Their world was defined by scarcity, water rare as gold, the soil unforgiving, the sun merciless. Yet from this harshness, the Nazca drew resilience. They dug underground aqueducts, channels burrowing deep beneath the earth to tap hidden rivers, ensuring crops of maize and cotton would bloom against the odds. The desert, though harsh, became their canvas. Flat, dry, and vast, it offered permanence, a surface that could hold memory across centuries. While other civilizations raised temples of stone, the Nazca looked down at their earth and chose to carve it. With nothing but wooden stakes and ropes, they etched colossal lines by removing the sun-darkened stones and revealing the lighter soil beneath. The technique was simple, the result unfathomable. Step into their time, and the desert floor begins to take shape under their hands. A straight line, stretching kilometers with uncanny precision. Then another. Soon, shapes unfurl, a massive condor with wings spread across the earth, its beak pointing to the horizon. A whale breaching in a sea of sand. Figures emerge so vast that no single human could grasp their form while standing within them. To walk the lines was to touch only fragments of a vision too great for the human eye, visions meant for the sky, or for the gods who watched from above. The Nazca Desert became a stage where humans whispered to powers greater than themselves. Some lines pointed to the mountains, where life-giving water flowed. Others aligned with solstices, guiding rituals tied to the sun's eternal cycle. Each stroke across the earth carried meaning, prayer, offering, plea. And yet, the desert also held danger. Drought stalked the Nazca people, their survival dependent on rains that often refused to come. To them, these geoglyphs may have been more than art, they were lifelines, immense rituals carved in desperation. If the gods demanded devotion, then devotion would be measured not in words, but in labor etched into the desert itself. Centuries passed, and still the lines endured. When the Inca rose to power in the Andes, the Nazca had already faded, their geoglyphs abandoned but untouched. The desert's dryness preserved them, wind brushing but never erasing. To the Incas, these were echoes of an older world, reminders that the land had been marked long before their empire. But then came silence. Conquistadors arrived in the 16th century, yet they never saw the lines. From ground level, the desert revealed nothing but scattered rocks and faint paths. For centuries, the secret slumbered, buried in plain sight, its scale invisible to those bound to earth. Only in the 20th century did the lines awaken once more. In 1927, a Peruvian archaeologist named Toribio Mejia Zesp spotted them while walking the desert hills. He saw lines that stretched beyond reason, geometric shapes too precise to dismiss as accidents. But it was not until planes took flight over the desert that the full vision was revealed. From above, the earth unfolded its message: animals, spirals, pathways, a cosmic puzzle sprawling across 450 square kilometers. The world was stunned. Who had made them, and why? Were these giant geoglyphs calendars to track the heavens? Ritual pathways for processions? Offerings carved to the gods in the desperate hope of rain? Or messages meant to be seen not by men, but by beings above? The desert offered no easy answers, only silence, only mystery. As the winds whip across the pampas today, the lines remain. A hummingbird poised mid-flight. A monkey curling eternally. A spider stretched thin across centuries. The earth itself still holds its breath, guarding the purpose of these shapes with the patience of eternity. Our story begins here, with the desert as both stage and script. But to understand why a civilization would pour so much labor into a canvas of dust, we must descend deeper into the people of the dry earth who lived, prayed, and died beneath this burning sun. The desert sun blazes without mercy, its rays striking the ground with the weight of a hammer. This is the world of the Nazca, where survival was a daily negotiation with nature, where every breath, every harvest, every drop of water was won through ingenuity. To live here was to live in defiance of the earth itself. The Nazca civilization rose between 200 BCE and 600 CE, inheritors of the Paracas culture yet creators of something entirely their own. Their land was no green valley, no river-fed kingdom, but a thirsty plain where the rain seldom touched the ground. The rivers that did exist were seasonal, capricious, vanishing when they were needed most. And yet, here, in this hostile place, the Nazca built a society of astonishing endurance. Their secret was water. Beneath the parched soil flowed hidden veins, underground rivers buried deep from human sight. The Nazca discovered them and bent them to their will. They dug puquios, spiraling aqueducts descending into the earth, tunneling like veins beneath the desert. To descend these stone-lined shafts was to walk into the earth's throat, where cool air whispered and hidden streams flowed. With this lifeblood, the Nazca fed their fields, turning barren sand into harvest. Maize, beans, squash, cotton, all sprouted in defiance of the sun's cruelty. And from this fragile abundance, a culture bloomed. Their villages dotted the valleys, clusters of adobe homes rising from the desert floor. At their heart lay the centers of faith and ritual. The Nazca believed their survival was always at risk, always tied to forces greater than themselves. The gods of water, fertility, and the sky were not distant, they were present in every drought, every storm, every shifting shadow across the desert horizon. The people expressed this devotion through art. Their pottery, vivid and alive with color, told stories of their world. Faces painted in intricate detail, animals with wide, staring eyes, supernatural beings blending man and beast. The Nazca did not separate the ordinary from the divine, their art was a mirror of a universe where gods and humans coexisted in constant dialogue. But even their artistry spoke of the desert's pressure. On their ceramics, gods often held severed heads, symbols not of cruelty, but of fertility, of the eternal cycle of life and death. The Nazca practiced ritual decapitation, believing that the life force within the head could nourish the earth, appease the gods, and bring the rain. In a world where every harvest could mean survival or extinction, such acts were not barbarity, but offerings born of desperation. Community life, too, revolved around the fragile dance with nature. Farmers tended their plots with care, families worked together to preserve what they had, and collective rituals bound them in solidarity. Festivals, music, and dance rose from the valleys, echoing across the desert. Each celebration was more than joy, it was insurance, a plea to unseen powers to keep the fragile balance intact. As centuries passed, the Nazca grew stronger, more confident. They expanded across the valleys, connecting settlements through trade. Cotton became a prized resource, woven into fine textiles that spoke of their artistry and skill. Llamas carried goods across the desert routes, linking them with the highland peoples of the Andes. The Nazca were no isolated tribe, they were part of a larger Indian world, a node in a network of exchange that carried not only goods, but ideas, rituals, and beliefs. Yet their environment never ceased to test them. Droughts returned, sometimes for years. The desert did not forgive mistakes. A failed harvest could devastate an entire community. And so, faith deepened, rituals intensified, and the connection between survival and the gods became ever more urgent. It is here, in this crucible of fear and devotion, that the lines begin to make sense. The Nazca, who dug deep into the earth for hidden water, also looked upward, to the sky, to the gods, to the vast empty canvas of their desert. If prayers alone could not summon rain, then prayers must be written larger, so large that no god could ignore them. The Nazca did not have armies, nor did they raise towering pyramids of stone. Their legacy was carved in the earth itself, a faith etched so boldly into the desert that it could not be unseen. To understand the geoglyphs, one must first understand this people, their fragility, their resilience, their desperation, and their brilliance. For in every line, every spiral, every animal drawn upon the pampas, lies the heartbeat of a people who refused to surrender to the desert's silence. As the centuries wore on, the Nazca identity fused with their land. Their pottery captured their myths, their aqueducts sustained their bodies, but the lines, they would speak to eternity. The desert gave nothing freely, but in return for devotion, it offered permanence. What the Nazca carved upon it would endure long after they were gone. Even today, their voices echo through the shapes that stretch across the sand. To walk among their villages is to feel the intimacy of daily life. To stand upon their geoglyphs is to feel the immensity of their vision. Both belong to the same people, the people of the dry earth, who made survival into art and prayer into monument. The desert may have tested them, but it also gave them their immortality. Now that we know the people, we return to their greatest mystery, their canvas in the desert. How did a civilization with no machines, no aerial view, and only the simplest tools carve lines so precise, so vast, that they could only be seen from the sky? It is time to step into their world of design, where human hands touched eternity. The desert floor stretches outward in silence, a canvas vast and unbroken. Here, in this barren expanse, the Nazca did what seems impossible. They transformed the earth into art so colossal that only the sky could behold it. The lines do not shout their presence. From the ground they appear as faint paths, whispers against the dust. But from above, they roar into vision, geometric corridors, spirals unfurling like galaxies, animals frozen mid-motion, figures vast enough to rival cathedrals. How could a people with no aerial view conceive such immensity? The answer begins with stone. Across the pampas, the desert surface is covered by dark, iron oxide-coated rocks, scorched by centuries of sun. Beneath lies lighter earth, pale as bone. By removing the dark stones and pushing them to the side, the Nazca revealed glowing lines that would shine under the relentless sun. It was a method simple in execution, but staggering in scale. Picture it, wooden stakes driven into the ground as guides, ropes stretched tight to mark direction. Groups of workers moving in unison, clearing stone after stone, the desert echoing with the sound of labor. Some lines ran straight for kilometers, arrowing across the horizon with a precision modern surveyors still admire. Others curved into perfect arcs, spiraling in forms that mirrored the cosmos above. At first, the lines were geometric, straight paths, trapezoids, and rectangles. They looked like corridors for giants, roads to nowhere, immense diagrams written on the earth. But then came shapes of life itself. The hummingbird with its slender beak piercing the horizon. The monkey, tail curling into an elegant spiral. The spider, stretched with legs delicate yet eternal. A whale, a lizard, a condor, the desert became a living bestiary. Some figures sprawled across hundreds of meters, larger than a modern stadium. To carve them, the Nazca would have needed coordination, vision, and unwavering intent. Yet they had no bird's-eye perspective. Their genius lay in understanding proportion, in scaling small drawings into monumental ground plans, a feat akin to architects building cathedrals without ever seeing the full structure from the air. But the desert itself was their ally. Its climate, dry, windless, nearly rainless, ensured their lines would not vanish. Unlike drawings on paper, these etchings endured. Wind could shift sand, but the desert's stillness preserved the marks. Once made, the lines became almost eternal, lying untouched beneath the sun's gaze for centuries. What was their purpose? Archaeologists debate endlessly. Some lines align with solstices and celestial events, suggesting they were calendars to track the heavens. Others point to mountains and water sources, pathways connecting the Nazca's lifelines to the sacred geography around them. And yet, the animal figures resist easy explanation. They seem less like maps and more like prayers, images too vast to be human-centered, too ambitious to be anything but divine offerings. Imagine a procession, priests and villagers walking along the lines, their feet tracing sacred paths during rituals. From the ground, they would see only the line beneath them, not the full shape. The power was not in the sight, but in the act, the journey, the ritual, the devotion written into every step. To walk the spider's leg was to touch the body of a god. To follow the hummingbird's beak was to carry a prayer on invisible wings. And yet, the mystery deepens. Some figures are drawn in single, continuous strokes, as though created in one unbroken gesture, flowing across hundreds of meters without falter. Others overlap, suggesting generations return to the desert, etching new prayers atop the old, layering devotion upon devotion. The labor was immense. Why would a people struggling against drought and scarcity devote such energy to this? The answer lies not in luxury, but in necessity. For the Nazca, the desert was alive, a place where gods could be reached if only one carved loud enough, large enough. Every line was a dialogue with the unseen, a monument not to power or conquest, but to survival. From above, the effect is breathtaking. The hummingbird poised forever in flight, the monkey frozen mid-spring, the condor soaring across the desert floor. These are not mere drawings, they are performances written into the earth, rituals cast on a cosmic stage. The Nazca did not build monuments for themselves, they built them for the gods, for the sky, for eternity. Centuries later, pilots would rediscover them by chance, stunned at the immensity of the vision revealed beneath their wings. But to the Nazca, the figures were never hidden. They were offerings visible not to human eyes, but to divine ones. As we walk among these lines today, the desert feels almost haunted. The figures stretch around us, silent yet insistent, each stroke a voice across time. We can trace their paths with our feet, but their full beauty, their full purpose, remains just beyond reach, like messages sent into the void, waiting for the right eyes to see. The question is not only how the Nazca carved them, but why. To find that answer, we must move beyond the lines themselves, into the rituals and ceremonies that brought them alive. For these were not drawings to be admired from above, they were stages for sacred acts, where the people of the desert reached out to their gods in hope, in fear, in devotion. The desert canvas is carved, but lines alone are not enough. To understand their meaning, we must step into the rituals themselves, ceremonies beneath the blazing sun, where offerings, music, and human devotion gave life to the shapes that still whisper across the sand. The desert night opens with silence. Stars blaze overhead, scattered across the heavens like shards of fire. In the valleys below, torches flicker as figures move across the sand. Men, women, priests, children, each carrying the weight of ritual. Their feet tread carefully, not on random paths, but upon lines carved long before, lines meant to be walked, lines meant to be lived. The Nazca geoglyphs were not static images to be admired, they were stages for ritual performance. The desert itself became a temple without walls, stretching beyond sight, with the sky as its vaulted ceiling. Each figure carved upon the earth was more than art, it was a living prayer, activated by human presence, by processions that gave breath to stone and sand. Imagine the scene, a line stretching endlessly into the horizon, lit by torches and moonlight. Priests, clad in garments dyed with vivid reds and yellows, lead the way. They carry offerings, ceramics filled with chicha beer, baskets of maize, woven textiles, and, at times, trophies of war or ritual sacrifice. Their chants rise into the air, merging with the hum of flutes and the pounding of drums. To walk the line was to converse with the divine, every step a syllable in a sacred dialogue. Some shapes, like trapezoids and straight corridors, were vast enough to hold hundreds of people. These may have been ceremonial plazas, drawn not upward into stone but outward across the earth. Here, villagers gathered in mass rituals, moving in unison, their processions tracing paths that echoed celestial alignments. As they marched, the desert floor transformed, no longer barren, but alive with rhythm, music, and flame. The animal figures, too, spoke through ritual. The spider, delicate yet vast, symbolized fertility and rain. To walk its body was to summon the waters hidden beneath the earth. The hummingbird, drawn in delicate strokes across the pampas, embodied life renewed, its wings carrying prayers of survival. The monkey, with its curling tail, symbolized abundance, its spiral echoing the cycles of nature itself. The Nazca believed these figures connected them to cosmic forces. Their rituals were not mere performances, they were acts of survival. Each line walked, each offering made, was a plea to the gods for rain, for fertility, for balance in a world always threatening to collapse into drought. To fail in devotion was to risk famine, to anger the forces that held the desert in delicate balance. Archaeological traces confirm the footsteps of these ceremonies. Pottery shards have been found along the lines, fragments of vessels once filled with offerings. Wooden stakes, used as markers for construction, remain buried in the sand, testifying to the deliberate design. Some geoglyphs align precisely with celestial events, suggesting rituals were tied not only to earth but also to the sky. Solstices, equinoxes, and the rising of constellations all marked moments when the lines became alive with devotion. From the ground, participants could not see the full form of what they enacted. They walked the wing of a hummingbird, the curve of a monkey's tail, the outline of a trapezoid stretching into infinity. Their bodies became part of the drawing, their ritual completing what the earth alone could not express. In these moments, the Nazca themselves became living instruments of their god's vision. But from the sky where the gods were believed to dwell, the full picture emerged. To divine eyes, the desert was alive with shapes, pathways, and movement. The gods could see what humans could not, and that was the point. These geoglyphs were not messages for human eyes. They were declarations to powers above, inscriptions meant to be read by rainbringers, sun watchers, and the unseen forces of the cosmos. The desert itself amplified the drama. By day, the sun burned overhead, its relentless heat reminding all of the gods' power. By night, the stars stretched across the sky, constellations mirrored by shapes carved below. Perhaps, in the flickering light of torches, the Nazca saw themselves as participants in a cosmic dance, their lines echoing the patterns above, their rituals binding heaven and earth. Yet, beneath this devotion was always fear. Droughts haunted the Nazca valleys. Rivers could dry in weeks. Crops could wither under the merciless sun. The rituals upon the lines were not luxuries of faith but necessities of survival. The lines were both promise and warning, devotion kept balance, neglect courted disaster. The scale of these acts reveals the Nazca's extraordinary collective will. Entire communities must have labored to maintain the lines, clearing stones, retracing paths, ensuring no ritual stage was lost to neglect. The effort was communal, binding the people not only to their gods but also to one another. The desert was their stage, but also their covenant, a reminder that survival was possible only if faith, labor, and unity remained unbroken. When we look today from the air and see the hummingbird's wings, the spider's legs, the monkey's tail, we see more than art. We see stages of devotion, vast theaters of survival, where the Nazca sought to command the attention of gods indifferent to human suffering. But the story of these rituals does not end with the lines themselves. To fully grasp their meaning, we must peer deeper into the spiritual core of the Nazca, their pantheon of gods, their myths of water and fertility, and the desperate bargain struck between man and nature. The lines were the stage, the rituals the performance. But behind it all stood the gods, the unseen powers the Nazca sought to appease. To understand why the desert was carved in their honor, we must step into the sacred world of the silent builders, where myth and survival intertwined. The pampas lie empty today, their silence broken only by the hiss of the desert wind. The geoglyphs sprawl across the earth like ghostly veins, reminders of hands long vanished. The Nazca people who carved them left no written words, no chronicles of kings, no epic tales etched in stone. They built not pyramids to proclaim their power, nor palaces to enshrine their rulers. Their legacy is quieter, more elusive, lines carved in silence, prayers written across the sand. The builders of the Nazca Lines remain almost invisible to history. What we know of them comes not from their words, but from what they left behind, their art, their bones, their irrigation systems, their broken pots scattered across the valleys. They were farmers and artisans, warriors and priests, living in villages of adobe, their lives tied to the fragile rhythm of water. Their strength was not conquest but endurance, not empire but survival. Archaeology paints a portrait of their society. There were leaders, though not in the imperial sense. Authority was rooted in religion, in the hands of priests who communed with the gods and directed the rituals. It was they who likely commanded the labor of thousands, who turned the desert into a sacred book of lines. The Nazca elite wielded not armies but faith, binding their people through shared devotion and fear of divine wrath. Ceremonial centers like Kawachi rose from the valleys, vast complexes of adobe structures where rituals unfolded. Unlike the stone fortresses of the Incas, Kawachi was not built to last. Its walls were temporary, its design ephemeral, reflecting a people more concerned with the spiritual than the material. Archaeologists describe it as a pilgrimage center, a desert sanctuary where the faithful gathered to perform rites that echoed across the pampas. The lines, in this sense, may have been extensions of Kawachi's sacred mission, ritual avenues leading into infinity, stages where faith was amplified by scale. The builders were not nameless laborers, they were participants in a collective vision. Each stone moved, each path cleared, was an act of devotion. In their silence, they spoke louder than armies. The Nazca did not live in isolation. Their textiles and ceramics reveal a culture of vivid imagination. They wove cotton into garments of striking color, patterns alive with animals, plants, and divine beings. Their pottery glowed with reds, blacks, and yellows, depicting gods with fanged mouths, serpents coiled in endless loops, and shamans caught mid-transformation between man and beast. These images tell us the builders lived in a world where the sacred bled into the everyday, where every harvest, every drought, every ritual was part of a cosmic struggle. But their silence is deceptive. Though they left no script, their marks endure. To look at the lines today is to hear an echo of voices across centuries, voices that prayed, feared, and hoped. The builders knew they would vanish. They built for gods, not for men. Their monuments were not meant for human eyes but for the eternal gaze of the sky. Still, the silence of the builders carries weight. Unlike the Incas, whose conquests were sung in chronicles, the Nazca remain shadows. Their history is a puzzle pieced together from fragments, a skull adorned with trophies of war, a textile dyed with rare pigments, a geoglyph pointing toward the mountains. Yet, within these fragments lies a story of resilience, a people who turned scarcity into inspiration, silence into permanence. Consider the scale of their achievement. Without iron, without the wheel, without beasts of burden capable of great labor, they managed to coordinate works spanning kilometers. Without a written language, they transmitted techniques across generations. Without rulers immortalized in stone, they forged a legacy that has outlived empires. The builder's silence is not absence, it is intention. They chose the desert as their book, the earth as their page. They carved their prayers into the land itself, trusting that the gods would see, that eternity would preserve what time could not. In this way, they remain among us, not through words or faces, but through the shapes that stretch across the pampas, as vivid today as when they were carved. Yet, silence also breeds mystery. We do not know their names, nor the full extent of their beliefs. We can only stand upon their lines and imagine, the sweat of laborers clearing stone under the burning sun, the chants of priests echoing in the stillness, the collective faith of a people united in devotion. Their silence forces us to see not the individual, but the collective. Not the ruler, but the people. And so, the builders endure, not in chronicles or statues, but in whispers across the sand. Their silence has outlasted empires. Their quiet faith has etched itself into eternity. But silence has limits. To truly understand the Nazca, we must step into the rituals themselves, not just the lines on the earth, but the ceremonies beneath the sun, where faith was embodied in fire, blood, and offering. For the builders may have been silent, but their gods demanded noise, chants, music, and sacrifice to stir the heavens. The lines lie quiet now, but in their time, they pulse with ritual. To see them alive, we must return to the ceremonies that unfolded beneath the relentless sun, where the Nazca summoned gods through music, offerings, and sacred acts that bound their survival to the unseen. The desert does not forgive. Its silence is heavy, its sun merciless. For the Nazca, life beneath this burning sky was fragile, held together by faith and ritual. To live here meant to believe that every harvest, every drop of water, every breath depended on pleasing the unseen. The rituals of the Nazca were not hidden in temples of stone, they unfolded beneath the open sky, in valleys and atop the vast desert lines. Their world was a stage where gods demanded offerings, and where the people answered with music, devotion, and sometimes blood. At the ceremonial center of Kawachi, pilgrims gathered in their thousands. They came from scattered villages, carrying gifts of food, textiles, and pottery, their footsteps converging on adobe structures that rose like mirages against the sand. The air throbbed with the sound of panpipes and drums, music that echoed the heartbeat of their ceremonies. Priests, their faces painted with ochre and black, led processions toward the sacred spaces. In their hands they carried staffs carved with serpents and felines, symbols of divine power. The rituals were not mere celebrations, they were negotiations with the gods. Offerings were placed into the earth, fine textiles, feathers from distant jungles, seashells carried from the Pacific coast. These treasures were buried in the desert soil, gifts meant to appease forces that controlled rain and fertility. To part with such wealth was no small act, it was sacrifice, proof of devotion, and a plea for survival. But some offerings went further. Archaeological evidence tells of severed heads, trophy skulls preserved and displayed, their mouths sometimes sealed, their foreheads pierced to carry cords. These were not trophies of conquest alone. To the Nazca, the human head was a vessel of life force, a sacred seed. To offer it was to nourish the gods with the very essence of humanity, to ensure fertility of both land and people. Picture the scene, beneath the blazing sun, priests raising a head high, its features painted, its cords dangling in the wind. The crowd watches in silence, the desert itself holding its breath. Drums strike, panpipes wail, chants rise like waves against the emptiness. Then the offering is made, placed upon the lines, buried beneath the earth, or displayed at Kawachi's heart. Life given in exchange for life. Other rituals carried a gentler rhythm. Dancers moved in circles, their feet tracing patterns upon the desert floor. Costumes adorned with feathers and painted textiles shimmered in the light, turning the barren plain into a kaleidoscope of color. These dances echoed the lines themselves, spirals and curves brought to life by human motion. The desert became a mirror of the cosmos, every movement a prayer. The rituals often coincided with celestial events. Solstices marked times when the sun reached its extremes, when balance between light and dark seemed most fragile. At these moments, the Nazca gathered upon the geoglyphs, walking their lines as sacred processions, tracing pathways that aligned with the heavens. The desert floor and the night sky became one, earth reflecting heaven, heaven guiding earth. Through ritual, the Nazca turned fear into action. Droughts were not accidents, they were signs that gods were displeased. To restore balance required devotion, grand, public, unforgettable devotion. Every ritual was a dialogue, every sacrifice a message, every offering a desperate plea, let the rains return, let the crops grow, let life endure another year. And yet, the rituals carried another power. They bound the community together. In a land where survival demanded unity, these ceremonies reminded the people that they were not alone. Each offering was collective, each dance a shared rhythm, each procession a chain linking hundreds of feet across the desert floor. The lines were not only messages to the gods, they were bonds tying the Nazca to one another. Today, fragments of these rituals remain. Ceramics depict masked dancers frozen mid-movement, priests holding staffs, gods with wide, staring eyes. Trophy skulls rest in museums, silent testimonies to beliefs that once defined survival. The geoglyphs still stretch across the pampas, silent stages where drums once thundered and chants once rose. When we walk among them, the desert feels haunted not by death, but by devotion. Each line whispers of footsteps long gone, of offerings laid in trembling hands, of voices raised to a sky that never answered clearly. The Nazca lived in dialogue with uncertainty, and their rituals were the language of survival. But the desert is a cruel teacher. For all their devotion, droughts deepened. The skies did not always respond. And as the centuries passed, the rituals that once promised survival could no longer hold back disaster. The rituals grew louder, the offerings more desperate, yet the skies remained silent. To understand the Nazca's fate, we must enter their final struggle, where gods, water, and survival collided in a battle the desert itself would decide. The Nazca world balanced on the edge of thirst. Rain was not a constant blessing in their desert home, it was a visitor, rare and fleeting, born in the distant Andes and carried by chance winds to the valleys below. To survive here was to live always on the brink, measuring life not in seasons but in drops. At first, the Nazca had answers. They carved puquios, spiraling aqueducts that tunneled deep underground, tapping veins of hidden water. These systems, ingenious and enduring, still trickle today, a testament to their engineering genius. The puquios fed their fields of maize, beans, and cotton, coaxing green life from a land that should have been barren. For a time, it worked. The gods were honored, the people sustained, the desert held at bay. But the desert has a way of reminding humans of their fragility. Around the 6th century, the skies grew harsher. Climate patterns shifted, likely driven by the Great Pacific Current we know as El Niño. Torrential rains lashed the valleys, turning rivers into monsters that tore through irrigation channels, sweeping fields into ruin. Then came the other extreme, drought, years of sky without mercy, when the sun burned away hope and the desert reclaimed what little the rains had left behind. The Nazca turned to their gods with greater desperation. The geoglyphs expanded, stretching further across the pampa, as if the people believed that larger messages would earn louder answers. New rituals rose in intensity. Offerings of textiles and shells multiplied. Trophy heads appeared more frequently, carried as potent symbols of fertility and cosmic bargaining. Every act became an attempt to bend the will of the heavens, to force water from the reluctant sky. Yet, for all their devotion, the climate did not bend. Crops failed. Valleys cracked under drought, then drowned under floods. Communities that once thrived under the shadow of Kawachi began to scatter. Archaeological evidence shows the city itself, once the ceremonial heart of the Nazca, was gradually abandoned. The adobe walls crumbled back into the desert, leaving behind only fragments of ritual pottery and faint echoes of ceremonies once grand. Imagine the despair, farmers watching canals dry to dust, mothers leading children to empty storage pits, priests standing beneath the blazing sun with no rain to promise. The rituals that once united the Nazca now became the theater of desperation. Sacrifices grew heavier, the cost higher, yet the gods remained silent. Some scholars believe that this very desperation carved the final phase of the lines. The hummingbird, symbol of rainbringers, the monkey, tied to the jungle where waters flowed freely, the spiral, the eternal cycle of life and drought, each etched deeper into the desert, each a cosmic prayer too vast to ignore. To walk them was to plead, to dance across them was to weep, to bury offerings beneath them was to beg for survival itself. But even as they carved, the earth shifted beneath them. Studies of soil layers reveal erosion, landslides, and flood debris that scarred the desert valleys. The fragile equilibrium broke. The puquios, though brilliant, could not always endure the fury of floods. Without water, the Nazca's agricultural base collapsed. And with collapse came fragmentation. Communities fractured, traditions weakened, and once thriving networks of pilgrims and farmers withered under the weight of survival. The gods, it seemed, had turned away. Yet what is striking is not only the collapse but the resilience. The Nazca did not vanish in an instant, they adapted, endured, blended into successor cultures. Their artistry remained, their aqueducts continued to feed the land, their lines survived even as their society weakened. They were not a people erased but transformed, their legacy absorbed into the long arc of Andean civilization. Still, in those final centuries of struggle, one can imagine the rituals taking on a new, darker tone. Less celebration, more supplication. Less music of joy, more cries of fear. The desert floor, once a stage for cosmic dialogue, became a battlefield of faith, where every offering was a weapon against the encroaching silence of the skies. And yet the lines endured. When the Nazca themselves faltered, their messages to the gods remained, carved into the desert with a permanence their prayers never achieved. The people faded, but their dialogue with the divine stayed etched in stone and soil. Centuries later, when foreign eyes first looked upon the Nazca world, they saw not desperate prayers but strange ruins, silent and uncanny. The desert had preserved the lines, waiting for a new chapter, when conquistadors and chroniclers would arrive, and the ancient messages would meet the gaze of another world. The desert lay silent when the first Europeans crossed it. By the time Spanish conquistadors rode into the valleys of southern Peru in the 16th century, the Nazca had long since faded. Their temples were abandoned, their rituals forgotten, their gods silent. What remained was a whisper of pottery, ruined aqueducts, and the faint scars of geoglyphs hidden in the sand, too vast to see from the ground, too subtle for man on horseback to notice. The conquistadors were not seekers of mysteries, they were hunters of gold, of empire, of souls to convert. The desert to them was not sacred but barren, a hostile emptiness that slowed their advance. They saw adobe ruins crumbling in the valleys, burial sites disturbed by centuries of wind, fragments of textiles bright as fire yet strangely discarded. They did not see the hummingbirds stretching across kilometers, or the monkeys whose tails spiraled endlessly into the horizon. And yet, fragments of the Nazca world still bled into their records. Chronicles mention strange worship, ancient sacrifices, and whispers of water cults that had once ruled these valleys. To the priests who followed the soldiers, the trophies of severed heads and painted ceramics told not of sacred offerings but of barbarism. Rituals became condemned as heathen practices, their meaning obscured beneath the lens of conquest. The Spaniards had no eyes for the desert floor. Their gaze was fixed upward, to Cusco, to the shattered remains of the Inca Empire, to silver veins in Potosi. The Nazca valleys became backwaters of empire, their lines trampled by herds and carts, their aqueducts patched for practical use, their sacred centers mined for adobe bricks. The geoglyphs endured, but invisibly, sleeping beneath centuries of indifference. Only occasionally did the desert resist. Flash floods unearthed ancient burials, scattering skulls and textiles across the surface. Conquistadors and settlers stumbled on these relics and carried them away, stripping them of context, turning sacred remnants into curiosities. To the desert dwellers of colonial Peru, the Nazca past became a half-remembered ghost, spoken of in rumors, stripped of its voice. And yet, one can imagine the irony, conquistadors riding directly across the lines, their horses' hooves cutting over the wings of a hummingbird, the body of a spider, the spiral of a monkey's tail, without ever knowing it. They walked upon messages too large for human eyes, prayers meant for gods, not men. Centuries passed. The empire shifted, Spanish banners replaced by new republics, yet the desert kept its secret. Farmers plowed across portions of the lines. Travelers crossed them unknowingly. The geoglyphs remained like faint scars on the earth, waiting for a moment when someone, finally, would rise high enough to see them whole. The conquistadors never did. For them, the Nazca were a forgotten people in a forgotten desert, one more thread severed in the tapestry of Indian civilizations. Their gaze, so sharp in conquest, was blind to the greatest mystery under their feet. It would take centuries, and the invention of flight itself, before human eyes finally rose high enough to see what the desert had hidden. When science descended from the air, the lines would awaken, not as ruins, but as a riddle that would baffle the modern world. The year was 1927. A small biplane, its engine rattling against the Andean wind, rose over the desert near Nazca. Below stretched a barren landscape, brown, flat, lifeless. Yet as the aircraft climbed higher, something astonishing revealed itself. Shapes began to emerge from the earth, stretching vast and precise, straight lines cutting across kilometers, spirals curling like ancient shells, and animals larger than city blocks staring back from the desert floor. The pilot looked down in disbelief. These were not natural scars. They were deliberate, enormous, etched with purpose. The Nazca Lines, silent for centuries, were no longer invisible. Humanity had finally risen high enough to see them. In the years that followed, scholars, adventurers, and archaeologists descended on the pampas, their imaginations set ablaze. At ground level, the lines looked like nothing more than shallow furrows, sometimes only a few inches deep. But from the air they became living art, stretching farther than the eye could follow, precise in geometry and staggering in scale. Questions swirled. How had an ancient people, with no metal tools and no knowledge of flight, carved figures so vast and so accurate? Why had they chosen the desert floor as their canvas? And, most hauntingly, who were the lines meant for? The gods? The heavens? Or something else entirely? One of the earliest voices to champion the lines mystery was Paul Kosok, an American historian who visited in the 1940s. Flying above the desert near the time of the winter solstice, Kosok noticed that one of the great lines pointed directly to the setting sun. To him, the revelation was immediate. The desert was not merely a canvas but an observatory. The Nazca Lines, he suggested, were the world's largest astronomy book, written not in ink but in earth. Kosok's insight ignited a new wave of study. Soon after came Maria Reich, a German mathematician who would devote her life to the lines. Armed with measuring tape, compass, and tireless resolve, she mapped the figures step by step, tracing their paths beneath the blazing sun. For decades, she walked the pampas, defending the geoglyphs from destruction, urging governments and scholars to protect what she believed was a celestial calendar carved in sand. To Reich, the spider, monkey, and hummingbird were not only sacred symbols but constellations, mirrors of the heavens above. Her vision captured the imagination of the world. Newspapers dubbed her the Lady of the Lines, and her solitary figure, stooped, sunburned, stubborn, became almost as iconic as the geoglyphs themselves. Thanks to her work, the Nazca Lines shifted from obscure curiosity to global wonder, a mystery enshrined in UNESCO's list of World Heritage. But with fame came speculation. Some saw in the lines landing strips for extraterrestrial visitors, their geometry too precise, their figures too vast for mere mortals. Others argued they were ritual pathways, meant to be walked in solemn processions. Archaeologists unearthed offerings of pottery and shells along the lines, hints that rituals had indeed unfolded upon them. The debate swelled, each theory adding layers of intrigue to the desert's riddle. Science pressed deeper. Radiocarbon dating tied the lines to the Nazca culture, spanning from around 200 BCE to 600 CE. Ground surveys revealed how the figures were made, by removing the sun-darkened stones of the desert's surface to reveal the pale soil beneath, a simple yet ingenious method preserved by the desert's dryness. Satellite imagery, drones, and LiDAR scanning in recent years uncovered hundreds of additional figures hidden in plain sight, from jaguars to warriors to enigmatic humanoid forms. The more we discovered, the greater the mystery seemed to grow. And yet, despite the theories, astronomical calendar, ritual stage, water cult symbolism, certainty remains elusive. The Nazca left no written record, no explanations carved in stone. Their voices are gone, and the desert keeps its silence. Every interpretation is a glimpse through a fogged window, partial and uncertain. What remains undeniable is the emotional weight of the lines. To stand before them on the desert floor is to see nothing but shallow grooves and dust. To rise above them is to enter another dimension, where humanity speaks not with words but with earth itself, messages written on a scale meant for the gods. The rediscovery of the Nazca Lines was not just an archaeological moment, it was a moment of humility. A reminder that across the world, beneath our feet, ancient civilizations still whisper in forms too vast, too subtle, or too strange for us to easily see. The Nazca had etched their prayers into the bones of the earth, confident that someone, or something, would one day listen. And so the riddle lives on. As science maps, measures, and deciphers, the desert still holds its silence. The lines endure, stretching into the future, daring us to interpret their message. In the final chapter, we step back from the theories and listen once more to the echo across the sand, the legacy of a people who carved eternity into the earth. The Nazca Desert is not empty. To the untrained eye, it is only dust and silence, a barren wasteland stretching beneath the Peruvian sun. But for those who know where to look, the ground is alive with memory. Hummingbirds stretch their wings across the pampa. Monkeys curl their tails in endless spirals. Lines, straight as arrows, run toward horizons that never end. Beneath every grain of sand lies a question, a riddle left by a people who carved their prayers into the earth itself. These lines are more than art. They are echoes. Messages carried across centuries, surviving long after their makers vanished. The desert, cruel and merciless, became their protector. Wind does not disturb them. Rain rarely dares to fall. And so they remain, as fresh as the day they were made, vast inscriptions in a language we no longer understand. To stand on the desert floor is to feel small, humbled by patterns too large to grasp. Yet to rise above them, whether in a plane, a balloon, or a drone, is to step into another world. From the sky, the silence breaks. Figures emerge, bold and undeniable, as if the earth itself is speaking. No other monument on earth demands perspective in quite this way. The Nazca built not for themselves, not for their neighbors, but for beings who could look down from above. Gods, spirits, or perhaps the universe itself. What strikes us today is not just the mystery of their purpose, but the audacity of their vision. These were not monuments of conquest or empire. They were not palaces, fortresses, or cities meant to endure by strength. They were drawings, fragile yet eternal, dependent only on the patience of the desert. In a world where most civilizations sought permanence in stone, the Nazca trusted the silence of sand to keep their legacy. And against all odds, it did. The lines also remind us of something deeper, the human need to reach beyond ourselves. Whether they mark the stars, call for rain, or served as pathways for ritual, they speak of a people determined to communicate with forces greater than themselves. The Nazca were not content to survive, they wanted to be heard, to carve their voices into eternity. Every spiral, every wing, every endless straight line is a testimony to that yearning. Modern eyes, however, cannot resist interpretation. Scientists measure angles, chart solstices, and compare alignments. Anthropologists uncover offerings, textiles, and shells buried beneath the lines. Astronomers debate calendars, while others speak of water cults and fertility rites. And on the edges of reason, the wilder voices whisper of extraterrestrials, ancient astronauts, landing strips for visitors from the stars. Each theory adds to the line's allure, pulling them between science and imagination. But perhaps their greatest power lies in ambiguity. The Nazca left us no codex, no carved stone explanation, no guidebook to their desert art. They left only the silence of the pampa and the echo of their intent. The mystery is itself the message. It forces us to wonder, to imagine, to see beyond the limits of our own world. The lines are mirrors, what we see in them often reflects what we seek. In this way, they have outlived their creators. They have become a stage where every generation projects its own questions. To archaeologists, they are puzzles of design and engineering. To spiritual seekers, they are sacred pathways. To dreamers, they are signs that humanity has always longed for the skies. And to the people of modern Peru, they are a heritage both fragile and proud, a reminder that their ancestors spoke not in words, but in symbols vast enough to survive millennia. The desert, too, plays its part in the drama. Walk across it at dawn, and the lines glow pale in the rising light, their edges crisp and sharp. At midday, the sun washes them away, until they seem to vanish into the earth. At twilight, they return, etched in shadows as if drawn anew each evening. They are alive with time, shifting not in form but in presence, like voices carried by the wind. And yet, for all their grandeur, the lines are vulnerable. Roads have cut across them. Trucks and careless visitors have scarred their surfaces. Climate change threatens with heavier rains, the same force that may have once tested the Nazca centuries ago. The silence that preserved them for so long is no longer guaranteed. Protecting them has become a race against time, a modern ritual of guardianship for a heritage that belongs not just to Peru but to humanity. Still, even as threats loom, the lines endure. New technologies reveal more figures each year, warriors, fish, felines, drawings long hidden, waiting for us to rise high enough to notice them. It is as though the desert still has secrets to share, releasing them slowly, as if testing our patience, as if reminding us that not all knowledge can be rushed. When we look upon the Nazca Lines today, we are not merely studying the past. We are entering a dialogue across 2,000 years. The Nazca carved, the desert preserved, and we, the inheritors of their riddle, must decide how to listen. The lines are not ruins, they are questions, carved at a scale meant for eternity. And so the story ends where it began, with silence. A desert, vast and merciless. A people, fragile yet ingenious. Lines drawn not for the eyes of men, but for the gaze of gods, or perhaps for the future itself. The Nazca never explained their purpose. They never wrote the key to their code. Perhaps they trusted that mystery was enough, that the act of asking would outlive the answers. The desert whispers still. Beneath the blazing sun, the hummingbird spreads its wings. The monkey curls into infinity. Straight lines cut across the emptiness, forever pointing toward horizons we cannot reach. Echoes across the sand, waiting for us to listen.